But everybody says they want to learn and grow. But part of learning, we know, is pain. It is the biggest motivator. It is the biggest challenger. And so fear obviously is in that pain block.
Welcome to Tearing Up My Heart, Emotional Leadership Lessons, the podcast where we explore the connection between emotions and leadership. In each episode, we will dive into a specific core emotion in an unrehearsed interview of selective high-level leaders. Join me, Jenna Heath, as we navigate the roller coaster of emotions that come with leadership and discover valuable insights that will empower you to become a more emotionally aware and impactful leader. From personal anecdotes to expert interviews, this podcast is your guide to mastering the delicate dance between the heart and the mind. Get ready to tear up old notions and pave the way for a new era of compassionate and effective leadership. Let the journey begin. All right, everyone, welcome back to Tearing Up My Heart. Today we have a very fun guest to talk about a very deep, dark, awful emotion. So I think we put the best of two worlds together. So Celeste, thank you for being with us today and for diving into fear with me. Arguably, I think you chose the hardest emotion under the sun.
Well, Jenna, one, I'm so proud of you for starting this podcast series, and I love it. You are just so relatable. You are so connected to people. You're a walking ray of sunshine on this earth. So thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to be on, and I think we're going to tackle this fear subject pretty well.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I really appreciate that. Yes, I am so pumped because I think that you have just a fascinating career trajectory that people will really, really be interested by. You really built your entire, what I'm calling your first career in sports broadcasting as a top performing executive, very, very, very high achieving. And I'll certainly let you share a little bit more about your story. But, really when we connected, you were leaving Fox Sports as a vice president. And then moving into other sports companies and leading those companies. And then now here we are quite a few years later, and you're moving into what I'm calling your passion career as CEO of Visionary Building, which is an organization to help others unleash their potential, amplify their impact, and ignite their leader within, which I read that and I was just like, oh my gosh, yes. Like this is 100% what you were made to be doing, but also in such alignment with what my goal is with this podcast is really helping people break down the barriers of leadership through the volatile emotions that we all feel as human beings. So I'm just so excited for us to dive into this today. So why don't you start by sharing a little bit about yourself? What was your leadership journey like? How did you get to where you're at now?
Okay, well, I'm going to start with, I grew up in a town in Idaho with 3,600 people, one stoplight, and, there wasn't a lot to do. I'm very close to my family, so we were always doing something, right, outdoors or sports related. So basically, I grew up there, decided I wanted to be in communications. I read every single book by John Wooden to learn about positive thinking and motivation, and I thought at that time, I really want to be on camera for women's sports to show the equality between men and women's sports because I was playing basketball. I got a full ride scholarship to LSU. I went a year after Shaq left. So Shaq used to always come and play in the Gym Armory. It was tons of fun. But I did major in communications through school and broadcast journalism. And once I was done, I tell everybody this story because you get one of these afterwards. But I met a boy when I was at CNN SI, and that was my first job, Jenna. I was logging highlights overnight. I was working two other jobs, one at the Limited clothing store, doesn't exist right anymore, and another one as a waitress. So sometimes I smelled like fries going into CNN SI because I couldn't, take a shower or anything. I was going from one job to the other, but it was all worth it. I met this really cute boy. He moved to Los Angeles to be Tom Rinaldi's field producer. So this is what I did, Jenna, wasn't educated and informed about this, right? Learning about how much money I should be making. So I call up the executive, tell him I'm coming out to LA, want to be with this cute boy. And long story short, undersold myself by 10 grand, told him I didn't want to do what I was doing now, which was clipping the highlights. And of course I ended up clipping the highlights, but I ended up marrying the cute boy. So it did all work out. And so on from there, basically I started with Fox Sports. I worked basically every single level to get to a VP. I've done all sorts of things from Olympics to Super Bowls to All-Star games to playoffs. I've been so blessed with traveling around the world, meeting people from all over the place. And I think the greatest thing about Fox Sports was really developing a team of people. I was in charge of 41 people for breaking news and events and all the sporting events. So there was always something going on. I haven't slept probably in 20 years. I'm catching up on that sleeping now. But really that was my goal, is to become a VP of production, because Jenna, there weren't very many women who had become VPs of production. And I believe I was one of the first few that actually did it, because I thought, if I'm going to teach women leadership, and actually men too, I have to be able to walk the walk. It wasn't just good enough doing the talking, I had to do the walking. So that's kind of where I ended up. I decided to take that leap from Fox Sports and start my own company, because I really want to do motivational speaking. I love connecting people together, and I want to go a little bit deeper into their lives, because I think everything's so connected, right? And I ended up working in Vegas for a bit, and then I ended up working at Nesson in Boston, and now I'm working at Bally Sports. So it's all kind of come full circle. When people ask me what I do, I tell them, look, I am a media mutt and startup nut, because I've done a little bit of everything. I think if you're a curious person, you naturally learn and grow every position in television if you love it.
Oh my gosh. I've heard this story so many times, and I love it every time. It gets me so amped up, because I feel like you are a woman on a mission that never has allowed anyone to hold you back. And you're like, oh yeah, the boys can do it, so can I. Like, I am here for this. And, I forgot to mention too that, oh my gosh, you do so much, girl, so much. And I love that you're actually a co-host of your own podcast, Girl, How'd You Get That Gig, which I am obsessed with. Like, obviously I don't work in sports. Obviously my partner does, and I know a lot about the sports industry, but I am obsessed with your podcast because of the career development side and the leadership side. And you bring on so many awesome hosts. So plug for your podcast, because everyone should listen to that as well. And then you're also the author of this phenomenal book. I have loved this, Be You on Video, because really, I think when you look at this is a beautiful cover, by the way, for those of you on YouTube. But for those of you that can't see this, it's gorgeous. But I think that people can easily get confused by this and be like, oh, well, I don't want to be a sportscaster. I don't want to be in front of the camera, whatever it might be. But in reality, this book is about confidence. This book is about learning how to be you and learning how to manage your energy when you're in front of others. So can you just briefly kind of talk about your book? Like, how did that come to be? How did you decide you wanted to write that? Like, where did this come from?
Yeah, so it was funny, because when I was younger, like I said, I wanted to be on camera, and then I just really didn't want to live in the middle of nowhere again, right? Like, I was hooked on living in a big city, traveling the world, and I thought, okay, I don't want to go pay my dues to be on camera, so what else can I do? But I really had that itch still to be a motivational speaker and to have that confidence. And Jenna, I still get nervous every single time I'm going out to speak in front of a crowd. But I just love afterwards when people come up to me and they're like, you made a difference, or you made an impact in my life, because I think that's what we're all here for. And I've, coached so many on-air talent, and the on-air talent that is the best is really who they are, right? Like, you see who they are and then they talk sports, or you see who they are and then they talk news, right? But when they try to be too scripted and professional, no one likes that. They look like a robot or a deer in headlights. So I remember one time, I always tell this story. So there was a talent, she's now a big name, and we went out to Dodgers Stadium, and she had never done an on-camera hit in her life, but they thought she had potential, and they said, so let's go work with her. We did 29 takes, 29. And at 5, you could see the cameraman start to kind of look at his watch. At 15, she's like, I can't do this. She had her breakdown moment. But every breakdown moment, as we know, is a breakthrough moment if you choose for it to be. And I told her, look, I have the confidence in you. We're going to do this until you get it right. And the moment we do this and you get it right, next time it may take you 8 takes or 10 takes, but you can do it. And ever since then, I think the max she's ever done was 10. But that's what you need, right, is the confidence to believe in yourself. And you need to surround yourself with people too that are confident in you, and not just to see the potential that you're going to be great, but like know it and then support you to get there. And I think like that's what that book represents, is like, I've been through it. I understand it. I understand fear. I understand, people making fun of you. You're not going to gel with everybody either. And so you got to do you, because you only get one shot at this. So might as well do it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It's so motivating too. I think that's one of my favorite things about having you in my life is every time I talk to you, I am so motivated and I feel like I could run through a brick wall. So I'm really excited for our listeners today because, I think that I've said this in every single podcast episode so far, is that I truly believe that fear is the most challenging emotion that most of us will ever face. And it truly does hold most people back from pursuing whatever it is they want to do. But I think specifically, I see this as a huge issue with leaders. And I really, especially recently, have seen a lot of leaders struggle with making the right, quote unquote, the right choice because of fear. And so today we're going to define fear as a powerful and primal emotion characterized by a sense of apprehension, anxiety, or unease in response to perceived threats, whether real or imagined. It triggers physiological responses such as increased heart rate, sweating, heightened alertness, preparing the body to react to danger or perceived harm. Fear can arise from various sources, including physical danger, uncertainty, social rejection, or psychological stressors. It serves as a protective mechanism to help organisms survive by prompting them to avoid potential harm or negative outcomes. I chose this specific definition because there was so many parts that I loved, but the one part that really stood out to me is that it triggers physiological responses such as increased heart rate, sweating, heightened alertness, because of perceived threats, whether real or imagined. And I think oftentimes as leaders, there is no real threat, but we imagine them and we get so worked up and we make really wonky decisions because of threats that don't even exist. And so can you start by maybe just sharing your thoughts on how you believe fear impacts a leader's decision-making process?
Sure. I think it all comes down to your value system. That's one thing I really talk about in visionary building and work on with my clients is people's value systems. So for example, a leader is always going to do something totally different. Even if it's done by somebody before, you've never experienced it. And it's easy for us to say, well, hey, we saw this person speak, but it's totally different when you go through the experience of speaking. And so I think a lot of that comes down to our value systems and really figuring out what they are. There was a client I had last month, quick story, where her perceived fear was that she was going to fail in her parents' eyes. Culturally, she was supposed to be financially responsible, so she had a great six-figure job in finance at a very young age, but her heart and her passion was in fashion. And so we worked together to figure out, could she move over in a financial job in fashion so it wasn't so scary for her? And again, the fear wasn't even about going into fashion. The fear was letting her parents down. And I think so many times as leaders, we don't identify the fear at all. And that's what you have to do, is you have to get really real and look in that mirror and be like, holy Toledo, like what is scaring the bejesus out of me, right? Like what is scaring me, and get real honest with that.
I love that perspective because I think it does take a lot of honesty to admit that as leaders, we have fear, period. I think that, so many leaders expect, or they've really told themselves, society has told us that we have to be perfect, we have to show up a certain way. And I think that fear is in complete disalignment with that thought process, right? And so I think starting from this place of honesty and authenticity and being like, whoa, that's a lot, and where is this stemming from? And then going from there, I think probably is a good place to start. So I want to dive in a little bit more to values, because almost every single one of my guests has brought up the idea of a value system in some sort of way. And this is something that I teach in most of my classes pretty intensively, actually. But I find that very few people actually know what their values are, understand why they would use a value system, because it's not really taught in school very often. And I think I'm fairly unique that I teach that in college classes. But can you share a little bit about that of like, what does it mean to have a value system, to build a value system, to use a value system, especially as a leader when oftentimes we're in spaces that we work for organizations that they have their own values and they have their own priorities. What does that look like?
So what I have people do is rank the 8 areas of life. So I work in the areas of life. So the 8 areas for me are spiritual. And I mean, again, if you're atheist, that would be in the spiritual category, right? Because you don't have that belief. So spiritual, social, physical, financial, family, career, emotion, and mindset. And what I find a lot of times, Jenna, is people will say, I don't know if family's number one or spiritual's number one. And I'm like, that's okay if 1 and 2 are close. It doesn't have to be specific. But if you know that finance is number 8 and you can't understand why you're not saving any money or making any money, I can tell you that's your answer right there. Like in black and white, that's your answer. So first you have to look, because we're naturally drawn through our family experiences, through our childhood, that's brought on by family. So our value system's already there. It's reinforced every single day. So it's something that's hard to break out of. You can't, you can break out of it, of course, but there has to be that safety bridge between the canyons that you can walk across and see that. So if I'm talking to someone, and like to your point, Jenna, if someone is really in emotional fear, they sometimes can't even verbalize it. They can't talk about it until some time has passed. And I had the best mentor and some of the best coaches that I've surrounded myself with, where in that moment, I'm like, I need to call you now. I can't think, I can't move, I'm paralyzed. Can you help me talk about this? Because I don't know where I'm at, right? And that's been one of the most beneficial factors for me. But ranking those from 1 through 8 to really see where I align has helped, because, like I explained to people, maybe family was number 1, you go to college, maybe family isn't number 1 anymore. Maybe your social life just moved up to number 1, right? But let's say you graduate from college, a couple years later, you get married, now you have a baby, again, family can move up to 1. And I think what's happened in society, especially with COVID and social media, everything has to be either black or white. This way we're doing well and we're all of this, our best versions of ourselves on social, or we're doing horrible. Woe is me, help me on social, right? Like I need all of that. And probably the reality is we're going to go flowing back and forth all the time, or we're going to be straight in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just described like a perfectionist nightmare. I think that
Yeah.
very often that we have these perfectionism mentality, and even I don't actually define myself as a perfectionist at all, or even a recovering one. I think people often think that, those of us that maybe lean into more controlling tendencies are perfectionists, but I always tell people, I'm like, oh, no. I do not care at all if it's perfect. I just want it done my way. I was like, that's the difference between a controlling person and a perfectionist. But I often find that perfectionist tendency, they really struggle with this idea of values, because it's an ever-flowing concept, right? That, absolutely how we are raised, our society definitely changes what we value and how we value things. But as we get older, there is some level of responsibility that we have to take when leading ourselves and leading our own life, that, we're going to decide like, yes, I want to continue valuing this, or no, I don't. And kind of like you said, move in and out of that flexibility. And I think there's some fear there as well, right? There's some fear in the unknown. And I think that holds a lot of leaders back as well, is just that fear of unknown. So I was hoping that you could touch on this, because I think about your career in your industry, and there's a lot of unknown, actually. There's a lot that you can plan for, but then there's also a lot of things that you cannot plan for, and you probably just have to roll with the punches, do the best you can, and see how it goes. So can you share maybe some experiences you've had about having those fear moments in your career as a leader and how you went about navigating those?
I can. It was really scary for me to start my own business. And as a woman who was considered on the outside successful, because I had the VP label, I had made it to, probably the pinnacle of where I was going to be. Because my next step was become an SVP, because I probably wasn't going to ever be in the president's circle, but become an SVP and sit there in that company for 25 more years. And I shared this with you before, Jenna. Like, I felt like my soul was going to die, and it was nothing against the company or anything like that. It was just I needed to learn and grow. And I think what's so amazing, and you know this better than I do working in education, but everybody says they want to learn and grow, but part of learning, we know, is pain. It is the biggest motivator. It is the biggest challenger. And so fear obviously is in that pain block, right? So for me, it was so scary to become more than a sports chick, right? Like, how do I go to what I really want to do? How do I peel back more of the Celeste onion and say, ooh, right? Like, Celeste wants to talk a little about life. Celeste wants to go talk a little bit about spiritual stuff and deeper stuff. And oh my gosh, or people are going to think she's crazy or woohoo or whatever they were going to label me, because I had already been so successful and it was so much work as a leader to get to that point. So now that I had to show more of myself, now remember, I'm not saying reinvent myself, because I think it's always in us. But now that I had to show a little bit more of myself, I was like, holy Toledo, this is terrifying. And I remember, Jenna, one time, like, I'm crying on the bathroom floor, right? Like, I'm bawling my head off, snot running down my nose, mascara all over the place, right? Like, not looking pretty at all. And I'm sitting there, and I walked up to the mirror, and I was like, Celeste, do you want to play in the game of life, or do you want to be on the sidelines? Which one do you want to do? Because if you're going to play in the game of life, you're going to be all in, you're going to experience pain and fear and all of this. So if you want the other side of impacting people and really caring about them, you're going to have to go through some stuff. And so if you want to do that, right, like, get in there. And if you don't want to do that and you don't want to learn and grow and push yourself to be the best version of yourself, then sit on the sideline. And I called my friend in that moment, and she's like, Celeste, I feel like there's like, and I love this analogy because I feel like it's in everybody, right? She's, I feel like when I look inside of you, if I had a flashlight, it would be like Aladdin's cave. And there's all these treasures in there. And there's all these, right? Like, there's all these treasures. There's all these like amazing like gold coins and stuff. But unless you let people see that, it's always going to be stuck in your cave. And I'm like, oh, I'm terrified. I don't know if I want people to see my cave, right? There's a lot of, besides the treasures, there's a lot of other stuff going on up in there. And I think, for me, reinventing myself into what I do now, and also writing my book. Writing my book was terrifying for me too, because again, anytime you're learning something new and you're like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, of course it's going to be terrifying. And again, you start with what you know and you start with what you know and let what you know grow. And people forget that all the time. They're like, oh, I got to learn something new. I have to like figure this out. No, start back at the building blocks. Easier said than done, I know. But start back at the building blocks and build each little section.
100%. Yes. I see this all the time, and I talk to my students about this all the time, is that you need to get better and in progression of things that you are good at. Like, become great at things you're good at. Don't work on, like, people put so much of their effort and energy in becoming okay at things they suck at. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, I think about right, because I'm around a lot of sports stuff a lot in my home, and I love that. But I think about people that, if you are a good football player, if you play in the NFL, you're a good football player. I always think of kickers because they actually make good money, and their career is not quote unquote hard in comparison to other players in the NFL, and they can have a long, luxurious career. They're never going to be billionaires, but they'll do pretty good. And so I think about those folks, that it's like kickers are not all of a sudden going to be like, you know what? I think I want to go play basketball. Like, something that I'm not good at, I'm probably not going to be good at, but, totally different than kicking a football. But like, no, I'm going to go play basketball. Like, I think that'd be good. And I'm like, I think about how often people do this, that they do the exact same thing. They're like, I am okay at math. Like, I'm not great, but I'm okay. And you know what? I'm going to become an accountant that requires a ton of math, and I'm going to lead a team of accountants. And I'm like, what? That makes no sense. Like, you are actually naturally really good at speaking in front of other people. Maybe work on becoming excellent at that because you're already like on the right road. It makes literally no sense to me, but I think about this a lot, and I think it goes back to fear, is that I think that things that we're actually naturally kind of good at, people are terrified to become great at those things because then they're great at something. And being great at something is actually a lot of pressure. And people know you're good at it then. And then people are going to ask you for your advice and your time. And there's a lot of fear that goes in that. And I see that leaders hold themselves back so much in this way because they're unwilling to get great at something. And I think for a lot of people, leadership is that thing that I think a lot of people are good managers. Like, they're fine, they're okay, they can check the boxes, they can do the things. But in order to become an excellent leader, you have to grow and develop and like really work towards that. So what have you seen as like throughout your journey of really like leaning in to becoming great at something, and like whether that be when you played basketball or with your sports career or even now, like leaning into becoming great at something and all the work that is required of that, how do you kind of like hold back those little fear monsters and like do it anyway?
I love what you said there, Jenna, because I think when you're talking about your students, becoming great requires that you're all in. And I think that's the most terrifying thing about it all. When it comes down to it, the bottom line is if you're all in, like you are all in. So, if someone gets afraid to, get married or something, it's because, that's all in, right? You got the ring on it. That it can be terrifying for people. And I think the problem is with leaders, if we would look at the all in piece as, okay, I'm going to be the best motivational speaker, or I'm going to be the best podcaster, right? And we say, like, this is the dream, this is the goal. It comes in many different forms that we can learn from. And I think that's what people miss. So an example of that is if I'm saying I want to be the best motivational speaker, well, I also want to write a book. But I can write a book about the topic that I'm interested in or an expert in, like you just talked about, right? Like I'm all in, but now what form do I want to do it in? I want to write a book on it. I want a podcast on it. I want to speak to people on it. I want to teach on it, right? And I think what people do is instead of thinking about it like that, because it's kind of like a scary door to walk through, they're like, well, let me be good at this and let me be halfway decent at this. And like you said, let me suck at this, but at least I have all of my eggs scattered around. So if this drops out, now I have this. And if this drops out, now I have this. And like, I get it, right? Because we see that all the time with social. We see that all the time in our world. It is these talented people show up, right? Like I think of like Taylor Swift. And Taylor Swift, brilliant businesswoman, great singer, right? Like she has the total package and she's doing so many things. But I'm not a Swiftie, right? If I was a Swiftie, maybe a Swiftie out there can answer this for us, Jenna. Are you a Swiftie?
Oh, I would say I'm like an 80% Swiftie. I'm an old school Swiftie. Okay. So like I loved her when she was country. Okay. I still like her though. No one hate me. I still like, okay. I like Taylor Swift. I'm just not like obsessed.
I hear you. Yeah. So we need someone who's an expert on Taylor, in other words. But I would have to look at her value systems because I know that she loves to sing. I know that she loves to, perform and be a businesswoman. But like, what's her value system? What's totally driving her? I don't know what that is. And I think unless you know Taylor probably personally, you don't know what that is either. We can all guess at it. We can guess at her value system. Like maybe her parents being proud of her is what drives her the most. Maybe her story about not fitting in high school to show everybody that's what's driving her, right? So whatever her value system is, that's really driving her. So what was your question? Because I got off on that tangent, sorry.
I don't know, but I think we answered it. I think we answered it. But it did make me think of a entirely different question. Entirely different. Okay. So we're going a different direction here. Okay, fear of failure. So I feel like that this is just a really important aspect of fear, is that I think there's like the fear of, well, back to our definition, right? Like, so there's these real threats in life. Like there's physical threats. Like I understand people that, are scared to get on an airplane or something like that because you're afraid of dying. Sure. Okay. I'm personally not. I grew up in airports. They're actually very safe. Fun fact. You're not going to die in an airplane most likely. But here nor there. My dad was an air traffic controller, so I know a lot about the air.
Oh,
um,
cool. I didn't know that.
Fun fact of the day. But I think that there are those real legitimate fears, but then there's the fears that we make up in our brain, right? And so I think fear of failure is actually somewhere in between, because I think that fear of failure actually could be really real, right? Like if you fail as a leader, you fail at your job, like you could get fired, and then there are real tangible hardships that come along with that. You can't pay your bills, you don't have a way to put food on your table. So that is like a real physical fear. But then it's also, there's this mental side of fear of failure that, you know, when I say like, oh, I'm afraid to run a half marathon because I don't think I'm going to succeed. And I'm like, okay, well, what does succeeding at running a half marathon look like? Like, where is that fear really rooted? So I know this is an area you work a lot with some of your clients on. So can you talk about just that fear of failure and how you think that holds leaders back?
Yeah, I definitely think you're spot on with that. Just that leaders, when we were young, probably always stood out because a lot of people shy away from leadership, right? They don't want to be a top performer because it's scary. And, you know, let's say maybe 10% of the population is a top performer. And so they're really looking at that leadership. It wasn't that they weren't scared too. It's just, you know, maybe their parents were pushing them to do it, or, you know, maybe they were sitting there going, hey, like this is my way out, right? Like let me get really good at this or learn more about it because I'll make more money and then I won't have to live the way that I grew up. Like whatever that those drivers are, let's call them. I think happen all the time. And I think, you know, one of the things with leaders is they don't ever look at the other side. And this is one of the things I really wanted to focus on, Jenna, because I feel like where you break through is if we look at those 8 areas of life. So say someone is terrified to just, let's use well, we don't want to use a plain example because that would be a real fear, but let's say someone is afraid to start their own podcast. All right. And since you and I are both doing podcasts, there we go. So someone's afraid to start their own podcast, and it's a real big fear because people have maybe made fun of them with the way they speak or the way they talk. I know people tell me all the time, slow down, and I try, but it just kind of keeps coming out, like Shrek, better out than in. And then, you know, maybe they have been told like they're not attractive, or you know what I mean? Like it could be anything and everything. Maybe their teeth aren't straight enough, or someone's told them they had a big nose. And so that fear is legitimately holding them back. Now, realistically, it could be some person saying it to hurt them intentionally because they already know that they're like sensitive about it. Or sometimes it's just a passing moment and nothing's really meant by it either, right? Like people say to me, oh my gosh, you're so tall. Well, yeah, I'm 6 feet tall, so it is. I am tall, right? But could I take that as a negative or a positive? You know, it's really a fact. So if we look at that person who's scared to start the podcast, for example, and we say, okay, but what's the positives to you as an individual in your value system for you to start this podcast? And so in your heart and soul, do you want to start a podcast really for the right reasons? Like, are you using it to, you want to be famous? That's fine. If you're going to admit that and that's your driver, good for you, right? Like, own it. But really, what are the positives in every area of life? Because it's all connected. And what are those positives to you starting that podcast? So if we look at it from a spiritual level, maybe you know deep down you're here to help impact other people. And so a positive, even though you're terrified, is you're going to go and make a difference. We look at the next emotion of saying financial. Well, doing a podcast can lead to financial income, a different revenue stream if you're successful. So there's some financial security there. And then let's go to, for example, physical, right? So how does that help physically? Well, maybe it will build our confidence of being who we are in ourselves and feeling good about it, right? So if you start looking at those positives, what they found out through science is if you have literally 32 positives, because our brain's automatically going to go to the fears, the negatives, all of those things. If we find 32 of them, the mind will actually balance back out. And it will say, you know what? Doing a podcast, again, even though scary, is really going to serve my highest good. It's really going to be skill sets I will learn to be the best version of myself. And when you start looking at it like that, it's a little hard to do in the beginning, but if you keep at it, and you look at it and you go even deeper and do more than 32, let's say you get to 64, what happens is you get your aha moment. So I do this all the time, Jenna. I've learned this a long time ago, but I do this all the time. And like when I started my podcast, my aha moment, well, let's first talk about my fear, and we'll talk about your fear too if you want to. But my fear was I'm with Amy G, right? And for those of you that don't know Amy G has been an in-game reporter for the Giants baseball team, has like a phenomenal way of interviewing people. She's so like connected and asks the right questions and does all this, where I'm a total spaz, let's be honest. Like I'm all over the place. And so I was terrified being with her because I didn't have the title of talent. I'm behind the scenes. I'm, heavier set, right? Like I don't look the part. So I thought, you know what? I was putting all this pressure on myself to up my game. I was like, I am terrified. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to screw up. So what I did with mine is I wrote down all the positives and I said, you know what? I know Amy will help me be better. Like this is someone I can trust and build a partnership with, which has been one of my highest values right now. I want to work with kind-hearted people and good-hearted people. So that's where I'm at in my life. And then I looked at, okay, financially, because I'm getting a little bit older, I want another revenue stream coming in. What does that look like? And then for me, a lot of it honestly was the speaking, right? I want to be a motivational speaker. How am I going to get out there more? The podcast is a definite positive for that, to get noticed and to make more of an impact for other people. So Jenna, can you share yours? Like what have been your fears?
Sure. Yeah. Wow. I haven't yet to have a guest flip things on me. This is an unrehearsed podcast. Here we are. No, I love it. It's kind of funny. I've shared this with a few folks, but like I didn't really give I didn't give myself time to overthink this. I really didn't. Like my husband had asked me at one point, he was like, you should do a podcast. And I was like, you're right, I should. And literally like a week later, I did. And granted, I want to recognize a point of privilege here that like I have a partner who has like a really incredible skill set, who like helped me with all the technology and all this stuff. So like I didn't have to learn a whole lot of new stuff. Like I basically was like, I teach for a living. So like I'm just going to interview a network of people and teach people, which is what I already do. So I didn't have a lot of fear in those things, but I would say once the podcast was launched, it saw a lot of success really quickly. I have a lot of listeners that I was not anticipating, and it's awesome. I love it, but there's a lot of fear rooted there now that I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, how do I add value to these people? How do I, properly vet guests and make sure I'm bringing on the right type of people to add value? How do I make sure that I am like showing up as my most authentic self, but also someone that does add value? So I think now that the podcast has actually started and seen some pretty immediate, like quick success, I guess I would say, it's like now I have fear of like making sure I can maintain that and making sure that I'm doing a good job. And anybody that works with me or works on my teams, they know that like I really do suffer with a lot of imposter syndrome. I saw a lot of success in my career at a very, very early age. And I continue to have to battle that like pretty much every day as a leader and as an instructor and as a professor, is like battling imposter syndrome that I'm too young or I'm not good enough or I'm not smart enough. Working in the academy, there's a lot of really, really, really smart people that I'm around on a day-to-day basis, which is awesome because you learn so much, but it's also you're literally around experts in like all of these different industries all the time. So now that I'm like in it with my podcast, I'm like, okay, like, am I actually smart enough to be doing this? So my fear kind of came at a different stage, but definitely still real. And I've had to take like really intentional steps every day to remind myself that like I was meant to do this for a reason and people are finding value in it. And shout out to everyone that keeps like writing and reviewing and sending kind words, because that actually means so much to me.
Yeah. I mean, just if you need an example of how you're maintaining this, I'm going to send you all your past episodes and everybody I've met who loves you. I'm going to record them and send it to you because you're doing it.
Oh, thanks, friend. Thanks, friend. I appreciate that. So, I guess that's actually a really interesting segue because both of us live in these pretty creative spaces with our podcasts, and certainly with you building your own company. But even I would say, like, as you're in your past leadership roles in the sports industry and in event production, very, very creative, innovative spaces. So, how do you see that fear really impacts creativity and innovation? Because I think a lot of times it holds people back pretty intensively into this whole like, this is how we've always done it, because there's no fear in this is how we've always done it.
Yeah, that's such a good segue. I think the one thing that I really recognized during COVID and where it's kind of all shifted is really with a fear piece. I think people just become doers. Like a lot of people that I see that get in fear, they start cleaning more, they start moving more, they start just like get this task done. Like they create these to-do lists, and the whole objection, like the whole object in their life is just to complete this to-do list, right? And I think with the creative space, as leaders, we have to sit and reconnect with ourselves. And it's so hard to do, right? Because I'm not a yogi. I don't meditate. I listen to this amazing woman. What's her name? I think it's Tony Jones is her name. Um, and she has these amazing mantras where she's like, it's not personal. It's about vibrational flow. And she does all of these raps to it. And it like her lyrics are off the hook. I can relate to all of them. And or I will sit and write, because when I journal, like handwritten journal, I'll connect back to myself, and then I like the creation and the creativity only flows when you're still. Like if you're trying to force it, like with Bally's right now, we are trying to do all these creative things, and I literally told my boss today, I can't like complete all this stuff on VOD. I can't complete like all of the HR stuff. I can't complete all this stuff if you want me to create. I have to sit back, and I need like 2 hours to sit in it and not have life come in. Because I think a lot of times, and I do it too, I'm guilty of it too, but you see people all the time when they're at events now, they're in their phone the whole time, right? And why is that? Because they don't want to face the fear of meeting people they don't know. They don't want to face the fear of, oh my gosh, what are people going to think of me? They start just going into their phones and they're saying, oh, I'm here, look at, look at what I'm doing, but yet they're not enjoying the experience in the room. Like, I remember one time it was this Justin Bieber, it was some game, and this kid was sitting there, and Justin Bieber came up and was singing to him, and the kid was literally like this with his phone. Like, he didn't know whether to record him or like be in the moment and just connect to him. So he was like constantly like just like this, and finally I think he put his phone away. He might have kept it up there, but I'm like, dude, someone's going to record that for you. Be in this moment, because Justin Bieber is singing to you, which you could tell was his idol, right? So be in the moment. And I think we forget about that as leaders and as creatives, because we always feel that weight of the responsibility to make the impact. Or like, I feel like as a leader, you're always worried about people keeping their jobs or being happy and going to that next place. Like, I remember, when Kobe Bryant passed away that day, our assignment desk was so busy, right, getting all this stuff in. And later on in that day, there was somebody on that was working for me that was going through a really serious problem. And I shut that door and I sat with him for 2 hours because I cared about him as an individual. And now I could have lost my job, right? Like, and I think to me it would have been worth it. But I knew he needed me in that moment. And I think like that's the biggest thing as a leader. It's so scary because people are depending on you, and you have to be there for them. You can't just walk away when the going gets tough. You can't just walk away when something's more fun. You have to set the example. And the reason why leaders have to set that example, Jenna, is you have to go through it to be relatable. You have to get that street cred before even that energy flow is going to work. Sometimes I look at people that will talk about things or have a whole business set around something that they've never even done before. And I think to myself, how do you get these clients, right? Like, what kind of, quality of clients are you bringing in? Because I want to work on those clients that are going places, that want it, right? And not everybody's going to do that. Some people are just signing up because they want to look good or check a mark, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's fun for them. Like, if I go paint, for example, I'm just going to paint. I can't paint a stick figure to save my life, but I enjoy just the creative painting. I'm not going to show anybody my work, but you know what I mean? Like we just need to sit in our space and then stuff will start coming. But I think as leaders, the scariest thing is you're trying to force it all the time. You're trying to move mountains when like that mountain is stuck and you need to go around the mountain or up the mountain. And you know, as leaders, we keep thinking we have to move it. Rather than just kind of like sitting in it and kind of seeing what's happening around us. Because it's always working in our highest good, whether we believe that or not.
Yes, 100% yes. And I think that you bring up such a interesting perspective there between like the individual fear and the overall responsibility, right? So I think about this a lot, is that leaders are human beings, just like the rest of the world, and we face emotions, which is what this podcast is all about, but we also face the real emotion of like fear and insecurity and anxiety, and we all have lives, and like that's just us being human beings. And so I often think that, you know, when we're having those really difficult emotions of like, oh, I'm fearful to have this meeting with a staff member because this huge news just broke and I really need to be focused there, but like you are a human that needs me right now in front of me, but I still have this fear. And I think this is what sets the difference between leaders and managers. Is a manager would be like, no, I don't have time to talk to you. I have to go deal with this breaking news right now. But a leader would see and recognize like the human being in front of me is actually more important. And I love what you said, that you were like, I could have lost my job and like I still think I made the right choice. And I think that says so much about like values driven leadership, is that even though you had the fear and the uncertainty in that moment, you still made the quote unquote right choice. And I think of how many times leaders don't do that. And I don't think it's because they're bad people, right? Like I think people oftentimes want to villainize the leader because they're easy to villainize. But in reality, a lot of times it's like, we're not making the choices we're making because we're bad or evil or whatever. We're making the choices because we're human beings and we're trying to make the most educated decision with the information available to us in that given moment. So can you share a little bit more about what do you think leaders can do in those moments where they're faced with these really difficult decisions between doing what might seem right, whether that be to them or the others, and the responsibility of being a leader?
Yeah. So, you know, in that particular situation, Jenna, I did stop and I asked myself, you know, Kobe was such a tremendous leader. I just think, you know, just on and off the court, he did so much for humanity. And I thought to myself, like, what would Kobe do in this moment, right? Like, I really just said, like, what would a great leader do? And that helped make my decision. But I think when you're talking about this, what comes to mind is a story of us as leaders, again, working with our teams and understanding what their value systems are. So when I really got into all of this, I took my staff of 41 people and I said, how many of you want personal development? And to my shock, a third of people did. I thought, whoa, like I'm providing a service to you. You don't have to pay for it. Like, you know, I'm just going to help you. And only a third of people wanted it. So as a leader, you have to recognize not everybody's ready. You know, we just think, okay, if you could see your potential, if you can see where I'm trying to push you, if you can see it, like I'm going to help you get there. And to be honest with you, there's some people that just, they're not ready. And some people have to hit rock bottom before they're ready. Some people have to wake up before they're ready. Some people maybe just need like 2 more steps before they're ready. So one, you got to meet people where they're at. And I learned such a valuable lesson because we're always learning from everybody. Like leaders are learning from everybody. And one of the people that works for me, he's like, I don't want anything to do with personal development. I think it's a bunch of crap. Like I want to come in, earn my paycheck for 8 hours and go home. And I just looked at like, Jenna, I was so shocked. I was like, wait, what? Because it hit my value system, right? I thought, did you just say that? And I realized his highest value was he wanted to be a comedian. He didn't want to be in sports. He was just literally doing it for a paycheck and a job. And as long as he did that job fine, I didn't need him to be all in. He wasn't going to be one of my leaders. He was coming in at like more of a entry-level position, and he basically knew what he wanted. So as a leader, I think sometimes we put that pressure on ourselves to say, oh my gosh, we got to provide for everybody and we got to meet everybody where they're at and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's really, you know, the fear is, you know, maybe everybody just doesn't want your help. or maybe you're not the right teacher for them right now. Like there's times when, I've worked with people and they're like, oh my gosh, I got to keep my clients and I got to keep this and I got to do that. And I think to myself, I recommend everybody for everything, because maybe I'm not the right teacher for you, right? Or maybe you've learned from me and now it's time to learn from this person. We can keep learning from each other. There's enough space for everybody. One person told me it the best, and it's always stuck with me, of, if you look at everybody, like here's the sun, and everybody has their own ray in the sun, right? Like we're all in there in the sun, right? Like we're all together. And once we recognize that, it doesn't seem so fearful. Because I think as leaders too, we get this, we're going to show that we can do it, and we have to prove other people wrong that our, way was right, or we have to show that we're there for everybody so no one can fail. And that's just not realistic. Like there's nobody who can sustain that, first of all, without burnout. And that's why you saw a lot of people get burned out in COVID, right? They thought, okay, now we're going to look at what our values are for the first time in a long time, because we feel burned out, we feel fried. We don't want to go to the office every day. We want to maybe go to the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week, because our value now is to be with our family or to have time for ourselves. So the values kind of started shifting in our lives.
I could not have thought of a better example than that. And just that, yeah, because I mean, I think that happened to so many of us during COVID, is that we reevaluated what was most important to us. And it kind of made us realize, like, oh, whoa, maybe I'm not living in alignment with my values. And I don't think a lot of people would have used that language, maybe because they just didn't know. But in reality, that's what it was. That's really powerful to think about. And I think this is something that I often personally reflect on every day, is just that, like, am I living a life that is in alignment with my values, whether that be in the four walls of my leadership journey and what that means for my work and my career, or my personal life, my marriage. Like, am I actually doing what I say I believe in every day? So that leads me to my final question with you, which everyone gets to answer this, but it's extra special on Emotional Fear Day. I just made up that title. I really like that title.
I like that title. Go with that. Let's do that.
So
Get it on the book.
if you had no fear at all, no anxiety, nothing to hold you back, what would you be doing with your life and why?
I would be doing what I'm doing now, to be honest with you. It would be so nice not to have the fear that comes with it. So, like I said, I've always seen myself doing the motivational speaking and just connecting with other people, because I'm so curious about people. I just, everybody that I meet, I'm like, why do you do that? How does that happen? Explain your process. What's going on in your mind? How did you grow up? And so I love it. Like, this is who I am. I think if you would ask me that question when I was in, my Fox days or something like that, I would have said, I want to go more into the motivational speaking and really help educate people. I think for me personally, when I do keynotes even, I like them to be interactive, because I remember so many times when I was sitting as a kid or in college and we had these great speakers came in, but I couldn't relate to them, right? And I was like, oh, I can't relate to you because I grew up on a farm, you know what I mean? Like I felt a little bit different. And what I try so hard in my keynote speeches or when I'm meeting with a group is I'm basically teaching you a skill set, and I want you to walk out the door with that skill set. So if it's you, basically with your elevator pitch, I want you to have that down. And I'm going to tell a little bit of my stories to get you motivated, or so you remember things like the sun analogy. But really, my intention is that I make use of your time and energy, because we're all here. It's all about time and energy. We get paid based on time and energy. We do stuff for other people based on time and energy, right? Like that's what it's all about. And so for me, making that decision to say, okay, this is now me. I'm all in. This is all my time and energy. We're going to see how it works out, right? We're not done yet. So yeah, I would be doing what I'm doing now.
That's amazing. I seriously love that, and I'm also kind of shook because I don't think I've had anyone actually say that, and I'm like, that's awesome, that's amazing. I mean, I think all of us should be hoping that we get to a place where we feel that way. I think that's really powerful. So I know you actually have a really exciting event coming up at the end of the month that I will be speaking at, actually. Do you want to share a little bit about the Breaking Labels event that you have going on?
Yes, and one, I'm so thankful you're going to be part of this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And two, it's going to be a virtual event. People sign up. I'm going to be sending out the link, and we'll be sending out the link too. But basically, it's about breaking labels. And it's kind of, what we've been talking about this whole time, Jenna, is like people get really labeled in this world because we want to identify as someone. We want to identify as something or into some group. And it's time to kind of throw that old analogy away and those old learnings and say, hey, how do we break these labels? Because again, I'm a Celeste. You're a Jenna, right? Like whoever's going to sign up for this, I hope you all sign up for this. This is a you. And there's never going to be a you again, right? There never was a you before. So let's figure out not even what the best you is, because I think, that gets overused, Jenna. We talk about being the best self all the time. But what's the self you want to be? My best self could be I'm organizing that dishwasher like my mom's going to watch this, like my mom says, right? But I don't care about the dishwasher organization. So I'm not going to be the best Celeste I can be for her, but I'm going to be the Celeste I want to be for me. Throw those suckers in, shut the door, put the cascade in, and say, okay, I'm going to spend more time and energy speaking to you today or, speaking to the group today. So we're going to explore a lot about breaking labels and how you can actually do that, right? We're going to create tangible skills that people will learn on this virtual event to help them move forward.
Awesome. I am so excited. So I will be speaking about emotional regulation, which is going to be so fun. And I know you're going to be talking a lot about confidence and voice. And I think I'm going to keep the third person potentially a secret since we're, there has to be something to draw people in. So, but this is a free event as well, right, Celeste?
Yeah, it is free. So I'm really excited because I just think, if you're ready, those of you that are listening and watching, if you're ready to, jump in there and get things done, this is really going to help you. We are here to help, Jenna and I. So we're so excited to really help people.
Yeah. Well, I am so pumped for those of you that will join us for the Breaking Labels virtual event. I will make sure to put the registration link in the bio of this podcast as well. And we'll be posting it all over social media as well. So if you don't follow Celeste on social media, you can find her on Instagram at Celeste. I think you say your last name Gehring. Is that right? Gehring?
Gehring.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Gehring.
Well, I'm going to spell
Gehring.
it for people anyway.
Yes.
Gehring. Or at Visionary Building, her company's Instagram. And then, of course, you can follow me as well at J. Heath Moreno. And we will share everything. And we hope so many of you will choose to join us because I think it's going to be a really powerful, impactful event. Well, thank you, Celeste, for joining us today on Tearing Up My Heart. It is always so great spending time with you, and I'm sure that everyone is ready to just totally get over their fear at this point and do whatever leadership thing they've been excited to do.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. Love you, Jenna. Love what you're doing. Love Tearing Up My Heart.
Thank you for joining us today on Tearing Up My Heart Emotional Leadership Lessons podcast. I hope you learned so much and are ready to tear up old notions and get started on your leadership journey. Make sure to follow us at J. Heath Moreno, and I hope you'll join us next time.